Welcome to Global Voices, the official podcast of the Center for Socially Engaged Theatre at the University of Regina.
Hello and welcome. I'm Taiwo Afolabi. Welcome to another edition of Global Voices. I'm so excited to be having this edition today. The previous editions that we've done, it's been Dr. John, a postdoc at the Center for Social Engaged Theatre, who has been the anchor. And of course, we have Gabriel behind the camera doing all the touchings and all of that. But today, interviewing a visiting scholar and researcher. Her name is Jonah, and Nika is going to introduce herself in a bit. But I just want to say at the beginning, as we get into this conversation today, it's that one of the reasons why I really appreciate the work that Nika does is that Nika, as a founder and co-executive director of Pan-African Creative Exchange, Nika is a connector and also a cultural intermediary. And she's going to speak more to that at some point. But most importantly is that she is able not just only to connect people and look for opportunities and things like that, but also she understands the power of making opportunities, like making them available, working together with organizations, individuals. She's able to spot opportunities in the room. And she's able to say, who can we bring? Who can we work with to maximize these opportunities? We're so excited and really fortunate to have Nika Jonah at the Center for Socially Engaged Theatre here at the University of Regina, Saskatchewan, in Canada. Good to have you, Nika.
Well, good to be here, Taiwo. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
And you've been here for some couple of days. How has it been in Regina?
Hot and cold. I was promised good weather, but actually it was nice to kind of get a sense of the seasons and how the real Regina, which I've been told is quite cold, but today is very sunny. So it's been good. I feel that I've been very much looked after by you and your team at the Centre for Socially Engaged Theatre.
Well, thank you so much. Before I go to you introducing yourself, you said you've been fed with some idea about Regina. When you got here, was there any perception, any stereotype shattered?
Absolutely shattered. I actually thought I was coming to the equivalent of Little House on the Prairie. I think as people said to me, it's prairie country, there's wheat fields everywhere, you're going to be in the middle of nowhere, you're going to be surrounded by wheat, and you couldn't be anything further than that. I mean, obviously you're surrounded by it, but actually you're in a city with lots of buildings and supermarkets and shops and malls. So that sort of image is erased from my mind permanently because it's actually a very nice place. It's very nice. Yeah.
I'm happy to hear that because for us that we live here in Saskatchewan and on the prairies, that's a perception we get everywhere. It's like you're living in a village in that rural place. So I guess this is to Canadians, other Canadians, and other folks across the nations of the world. Hey, come to Saskatchewan. There's so much happening here. Anyway, do you want to introduce yourself quickly before we dive into our conversation today?
Yes, I'm Nika Jonah. I'm based in the UK. I say live, I feel like I live out of a suitcase going to many countries around the world. My parents are Nigerian. My mum is Yoruba. My father is a Hausa, but was raised in Lagos. He has a bit of a Yoruba Hausa vibe. I grew up most of my life in the UK, and I spent early career in the US. I did a lot of work in advertising, fashion, music industry, design. And then I moved back to the arts England, and I started working for the Arts Council England. I was there for just under 9 years, and I ran a program that was set up to support African, Asian, and Caribbean artists based in England, and to help catalyze some kind of change. And I talk to this because the work that I did at the Arts Council has very much led me to where I am today with the Pan-African Creative Exchange. The Pan-African Creative Exchange is a biannual showcase platform that happens in Bloemfontein, South Africa, as part of the Vrystaat Festival. And it was set up to address the imbalance of opportunities for artists based on the continent, for them to be able to have access to investors that are either creative investors, artistic directors, artists, people who can help you make your work or find collaborators or partners for your work, but also people that can financially invest in your work. And we've done 3 editions, two in person and 1 online, and our 4th edition will take place in Bloemfontein next year. In our off year, we run a producers lab, a dramaturgy lab, and then satellite activity in various places. So we've done activity in Jamaica, we do regular activity at the Brighton Fringe Festival. We're going to do something in July this year in Tunisia, and we're hoping to do something towards the end of the year as part of the Lagos Fringe Festival in Nigeria.
Amazing. And we're also hoping that we're cooking something here to see how we can bring pace, do some collaboration here in Saskatchewan. I was in South Africa at the last 2023 showcase, and I gave the keynote there. And part of what really jumped at me is really the impetus, the rationale for pace. Do you want to talk about that? Why pace? Why do you think pace is important right now? Why do you think that what pace embodies is really critical to the creative industry and the cultural sector?
There's so many ways that I can approach it, so I'll come up with things that are important to me. I think one, there's a figure. It's quoted everywhere in relation to the cultural and creative industries in Africa, and it's less than 1% of touring product. Opportunities for artists comes, when you're looking at in terms of the global stage, less than 1%, so it's something like 0.004 or something percent comes from the continent of Africa. And out of that less than 1%, 80% of what is circulated around the world as cultural product is coming from South Africa or North Africa. So what does that say in terms of all the other countries in between? It's problematic. One, because a lot of the work that we see in the global north, and I'm talking Americas and Europe, is coming from maybe Africans based in these places. Now, there's nothing wrong with seeing work that's coming from Africans that are living in these places, but I think it's important that we hear from the people who have the lived experience, who are living there, the living experience of being there. The cultural and creative industries is one of the fastest growing sectors in the world. It's certainly a very fast growing sector on the continent. And I think it's important that people start to figure out ways to develop themselves as artists, to strengthen themselves, to be able to offer their product for multiple markets, and to partner and to collaborate in a multitude of ways. I think there's some very, very powerful work that comes out of the continent, and it's powerful because it's very progressive. I mean, for a long time when I worked at the Arts Council, we tended to define everything in art form. Theatre is this, music is this, visual art is this. Africans mix it all up, and this interdisciplinary approach is an approach that you're now beginning to see, particularly out of the younger people coming out of art school or presenting themselves as artists in the rest of the world, because people recognise that why should it just be boxed in? You should be able to flow in and out, whichever art forms suits what you're trying to say. I think there's also something about Africans not always having agency in what is presented on their behalf. So a lot of the funding has come from cultural agencies like the Goethe Institute or the British Council or Institut Français. It has a lot of influence on the continent. But what happens is when you're taking funding for your African product to circulate around the world, those funders sometimes perhaps might want to present a particular image that is not of use to you, and it doesn't advance our narrative of Africa being diverse and contemporary. It can sometimes reduce Africa to this traditional space. So it's important that we we our work goes out with agency. I think also it's incredibly important for people to come to the continent because it dispels the myths. Just like you talked about the myth with Regina, there's myths, even Africans have myths about each other's countries. By going there, and South Africa is the starting point, it's certainly not the end point, but by going there, you start to dispel, you start to recalibrate how you've been thinking about Africa. And what we found with PACE is a number of people will go to Nigeria, or they'll go to Senegal, or a Senegalese person will now go to Kenya, and people start moving around, and that's what we want. Because we also want Africans to be able to think about circulating the work on the continent more. And there's lots more things that one can talk about in terms of mobility, what those challenges are, but we just like to be part of the change that's required. We're not going to fix everything, you know.
This is really interesting because you're raising some ideas that are really critical. Part of the research cluster, as you said, is on cultural economy, cultural policy, and the creative industry. And part of what you're talking about around mobility, around giving visibility to artists and their work on the continent, but also to build capacity, right? And then to network and all of that. But I also know that you do beyond, there's other components, which is the diaspora. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, as somebody who, when I go to Nigeria, they describe me as diaspora, which I found quite funny.
Diasporic.
Yeah, they said, you're from diaspora. And I'm thinking, I'm Nigerian. I just live abroad, but I'm seen very differently.
The language sells you out.
And it's interesting because in America, I'm seen as Nigerian because they wouldn't consider me diaspora. They're diaspora, because they're Africans that were forcibly taken away. And so sometimes in America and the Caribbean, they wouldn't see me. They say, oh, she's African. But when I get to Africa, I'm not. But what I think is important about diaspora is there's a new wave of interest in Africa and authentic Africa. And we saw that really come to life with Black Panther. I thought the idea that people would come in their African outfits to see the show, there was all these sort of movements and events where people would be challenged to come and present their Africa, and some of them were a little bit stereotyped, and some of them were very much responding to contemporary Africa. We've also got Nollywood, which is huge. I mean, I went somewhere in Jamaica, they were watching Nollywood. You'll go to all corners of the earth, you'll find the Nollywood films. And they in themselves have a lot to answer for in terms of how they distribute and how their distribution channels have actually helped advance the early actors, the ones that started off being with Nollywood for a long time. I think you've also got Afrobeat, which is a massive influence all around the world. You're hearing Jamaicans, Coffee, and a number of them speaking, Steph London, speaking in Yoruba, and you think, oh. And it's interesting to even be on the streets of London and hear young Caribbean women singing their favourite Afrobeat songs in Yoruba or in Pidgin English, and I'm like, oh,
it took the world.
It's really, and this also it's created this real interest in Nigeria, but in a number of countries across Africa. You've got a movement called Blacksit, which is kind of stemming out of Marcus Garvey's Back to Africa movement. So people are going to places like the Gambia, Senegal, Tanzania, and trying to connect back to their points of origin. And I think this is important in terms of the diaspora because the diaspora have always been part of our liberation. They very much were at the forefront of pushing Pan-Africanism. Negritude was Africans and Caribbeans in the diaspora developing negritude. And you think about how they've always had our interest. Have we always had theirs? They've always looked to us and said, what's happening on the continent, the motherland? Have we always had theirs? And I think there's a question to be asked around how the diaspora can help us advance, but how can we help them advance and can feel connected? Because what we found in PACE, because initially when we set up PACE, it was for artists based on the continent. And because I ran a showcase platform very similar for African, Asian, and Caribbeans in the UK, number of people, when I announced the launch of PACE, can we be part of it? A lot of African, Caribbean people in the UK asked me, and I said, no, it's only for people on the continent. But after a while, I started to have conversations with artists on the continent who said, no, please open it up. So we've opened it up, and I've seen people get quite emotional when they get a response from a Pan-African group of Africans telling them how their work spoke to them. They're talking about things that they hadn't even been able to articulate because they didn't have the language, where somebody from Senegal says, it's this relates to our culture in this way. Somebody, a Yoruba person from Nigeria will say such and such. Sutu, Zulu person from South Africa will say something else. And it's very, very powerful, particularly for diasporic Africans, because it really makes them feel like they're connected. They can't always find their articulation, but they have this innate feeling. And the space is allowing them to feel like they belong and they're part of this journey.
I would say, and just even in terms, and you had an amazing time with my students a few days ago on decolonizing research, and you were really talking about how these can also help us to rethink the idea of research, right? The idea of knowledge production, the idea of ethics, how we engage in all of that. But the reason I cited that or referred to that is that I wanted to ask the question around some of the key activities you do space, especially how you do, of course, dramaturgy lab, for example, producers lab, how those activities are helping you to achieve that idea of that knowledge exchange, networking, of rethinking and recalibrating our mindset or decolonizing our mind, as Kuku Ationgo would say, and some other things like that. Do you want to speak to some of the key activities that you do at PACE and how those activities are helping you to achieve all of these rationales and ideas that you've outlined?
I would say this, that when I worked at the Arts Council, I worked in the performing arts, I worked in visual arts, it was my area, my remit was cross-cutting, it was national and it was international. So some of the ideas have been percolating, and one of the ideas that have been percolating is the idea that we all need the outside eye when we're looking at our work, when we're developing our work. So work that's made for a Nigerian audience will have certain cues and cultural cues that are missed by others that are watching it. And actually, how do you think about making work from beyond your local spaces? So you can be making work in Lagos, which is mainly Yoruba speaking. If you want to carry that work to the north, it's different culturally, it's very different. It's almost like two different countries. What do you need to do to make that work translate? And we're not just talking about language, we're talking about cultural translations. But also it's about intentions. What is the intention of the work? I think that because we don't have enough criticism or critique within our practice, particularly I'm talking around the performing arts, we need to have other people feedback to us. So we created this space called the Dramaturgy Lab to do that, but we also wanted the artists to recognise they have dramaturgical skills. They have skills where they can offer advice and guidance to other artists to help them shape the work. And it was interesting, and I say this very sadly, that Wale Okitokun from Renegade Theatre in Nigeria, when we did the Dramaturgy Lab, you were part of it, and we invited him, and he said, I don't even know what the word is, I can barely pronounce it. But what was really interesting, a few months later, he ended up working as a dramaturge on a Wale Shenker play in Canada. Stratford Festival in Canada. Yeah. And it was just interesting how now he realised that those skills are valued, and he's working with a team in Canada to help make sure that the nuance of Nigeria was there, but also working with them to ensure that the audience would be able to understand some of those cultural cues that are non-verbal. And he was a great example of it. I think also during that lab, it really gives the artist some kind of agency to be able to sell those skills, even if they're going to collaborate with somebody. They might not be the lead, but they might say, well, this is where I can help. And they can package it in a language that has value and meaning, especially when you're dealing with with the West.
I'm going to transition to second part of the conversation, but before I do, I just want to ask one last question to wrap this up.
What are the key lessons or maybe lesson is not the right word, for lack of a better, what are the lessons that you've learned over the years prior to Pace and now in Pace that you think artists from Africa or artists in the diaspora need to start thinking about as they network, as they think about their work, as they move across spaces that can help them in their work?
I think first and foremost, you must see work. I find this quite interesting that artists don't see work. You have to see work from people outside your network because it will give you another viewpoint, another way of making, another way of viewing work. You have to see work from other art forms. You have to go and see what people are doing. If you're serious and you want to be at a very professional level, you have to be able to engage with that. Now, not everyone can travel, but you can travel through your computer. You can travel by going to local activities in your cities or your towns. It's not always easy for most people if they don't live in urban centres, but there are ways to access YouTube is great. But I think it's important that you see work and you have an understanding of the direction of travel. The trends, you might be ahead of a trend. How do you articulate that? And I think that's one. I think if you're going to apply for something, some kind of funding, give yourself time. If the deadline is at the end of the month, don't wait till 2 days before, because you can always make the best possible presentations of your work if you take time to articulate and look at the guidance. I find that a lot of artists have come to me and said, I'm applying for this fund. I'll quickly look through the guidance notes and I'll see that they don't meet 3 or 4 of the essential criteria. Don't waste your time on that. Or write to the organisations and ensure that there may be a workaround, there may be something that it might have been an oversight, but it's important that you communicate. I think that those time is really important. I think having your work written up in some shape or form, explaining what it is, with all your web addresses and things like that, your social media links, are really important. I'm surprised how many artists don't have that. I think it's important to know who's doing what in your own local space. Whether you like them or not, it doesn't matter. It's important to know. Because sometimes, as an artist, people will come and connect with you, but they're never solely connecting with you. They want to connect with your arts community, and it's important that you have relationships with people around you. So I think those are the ones off the top of my head.
Thanks, Nikki. I'm going to transition to the next part, to the second part of the conversation. But shout out to Owen Mas. Hey, Owen, when you see this and you hear this, or listening to this rather, it's Nick as a co-executive director at Pace, and of course, Nick as business partner, and of course, a mutual friend. And really amazing stuff that is happening at Pace, and we're hoping that we'll see what comes out of our collaboration to see how we can start thinking of animating our space here in Saskatchewan and also in Canada. I mean, Nika, you work in Canada already in different spaces. So really looking forward to that.
You have been listening to Global Voices, the official podcast of the Center for Socially Engaged Theatre at the University of Regina. For more details about the center, visit www.cset.ca.